Did you know that selling antique ivory in the UK could now make you a lawbreaker? On June 6, 2022, the Ivory Act came into force, banning the trade in most elephant ivory. And now, on January 28, 2025, the law is going to be expanded to cover 4 additional species. In this video, we'll cover everything you need to know to stay on the right side of the law. These changes matter because in theory they could affect anyone. Perhaps you're a collector of antique items and you have some ivory, maybe some pieces that contain ivory, and you're not sure what the future holds for them. You might be an antique dealer or a general trader. Maybe you've got some from a previous house clearance and again, you're unsure what to do next. Or you could inherit items and perhaps there's a piece of ivory and again, who knows what to do next? What are your options? While this video is here to guide you, we're going to have a look into why the changes have been made, what the law actually says, what you can do next, and what the future of antique ivory beholds. So, before we get into that, I think it's important to get some context. Let's have a look at the history of humanity and ivory. Ivory has been a prized material for thousands of years, deeply entwined with art, religion, and trade across cultures worldwide. It can be traced back to ancient Egypt, where ivory was carved into figurines and amulets, often reserved for the elite. During the classical era, the Greeks and Romans made intricate statues from ivory, including religious icons like the famous ivory and gold statue of Zeus at Olympia, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. During the Middle Ages, ivory was often used across Europe for religious objects such as crosses and devotional carvings. The Bavarian ivy reliefs are notable examples. In the 18th and 19th centuries, global trade made ivory more available. In Japan, it was used to create netskis, small intricate carved toggles. In China, it was shaped into elaborate figural statues. This is also the era when Scrimshaw emerged. Sailors, during long whaling voyages, carved intricate designs into whales' teeth and bones, creating unique pieces of maritime art. These are just a few examples of how ivory was historically used as both an artistic and practical material, tied to the needs and values of the time. It's easy for us today to condemn its use, now knowing the devastating impact it had on animal populations, particularly elephants. But it is important to remember that at the time, this was little understood by most people. Ivory was seen as no different from other materials like leather or wool. We should also remember that today, we also use materials which cause devastation to natural environments, a key example being our extensive use of plastic. This should be considered when evaluating antique ivory. Under the previous regulations, ivory items made before 1947 could be traded without a permit, but that all changed on June 6, 2022, when the Ivory Act 2018 came into force. This law introduced a near total ban on the trade of elephant ivory, regardless of its age. However, there are some specific exemptions. Items made before 1947 with less than 10% ivory volume, musical instruments made before 1975 with less than 20% ivory volume, and portrait miniatures created before 1918. You must register an item to meet these exemptions. That costs £20 and about 19,000 certificates have been issued since 2022. There is another exemption which is different to the others, and that is that items made before 1918 that are of, and I quote, outstandingly high artistic, cultural or historical value. To apply for permission to sell under this exemption has a non-refundable fee of £250 and requires extensive reasoning to justify. Around 325 certificates have been issued for this reason since 2022. And now there is a significant new development. From January 28, 2025, this law is being expanded to cover 4 additional species: hippopotamuses, narwhals, orcas, and sperm whales. Under this law, the term ivory now applies to the tusks and teeth of these animals. This change is significant when it comes to preservation, as items made from the ivory of these animals was historically used differently from elephant ivory. This means that many items such as Scrimshaw and narwhal tusks which were made as standalone objects rather than parts of larger composite pieces, will not be eligible for the standard exemptions. If they are to survive, they can only be exempt if they meet the pre-1918 pieces of outstanding artistic, cultural or historical value. It is unclear at this moment what would be needed to meet this requirement. In 2019, during the London Bridge terrorist attack, Darren Frost heroically used the narwhal tusk to stop the knifeman, and we would hope that would qualify for the exemption. For all the other items, the question remains, what are the chances of them surviving into the future? These are the justifications the UK government have given for expanding the Ivory Act. Starting with conservation concerns, they argue that the 5 newly added species are increasingly threatened. After elephants, hippos are cited as being the most targeted species for poaching, with their teeth being highly valued. For marine animals, the government claims that whilst climate change is already a serious threat to their survival, ivory hunting adds even more pressure, pushing them closer to extinction. Officials have also stated that loopholes in the previous law allowed ivory from species like hippos and narwhals to be legally traded, creating opportunities for illegal elephant ivory to enter the market disguised as other materials. I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of people, regardless of their stance on antique ivory, would support measures that effectively combat poaching and the illegal ivory trade. They also point to strong public backing as a reason for the changes, citing petitions and surveys conducted by climate and advocacy groups such as 38 Degrees and Lady Free Thinker. These showed overwhelming support for banning of the ivory trade completely and for this law. There has been strong opposition to the ban from a group called Friends of Antique Cultural Treasures. They took their case to the Supreme Court, challenging the law, but their appeal was ultimately rejected. The British Antique Dealers Association have also voiced its concerns and published a comprehensive article on their website. This article lays out the arguments against the ban in extensive detail and is worth having a read. Here are some of the key points they raised. Biggest concern is about the impact it's going to have on historic items. We already talked about the history of ivory and how it's been used as a material by humanity for thousands of years. It's part of our shared story. Many of these items do not meet the Act's strict exemptions. This renders them effectively worthless. Without a legal market, many owners have little reason to preserve them, and museums lack the capacity to take them all in. Critics will argue that it isn't just about profit, but preservation. These items represent a cultural legacy, and once they're lost, they cannot be replaced. This is something that future generations may deeply regret. It's also been argued that the antique ivory trade, particularly in the UK, has a minimal impact on the global ivory trade and illegal poaching. A 2016 report by the animal conservation organisation Traffic has been cited, as it found no significant link between the sale of antique ivory in the UK and the illegal trade in modern ivory. In a press release they said, links with the current elephant poaching crisis appear tenuous at best. Researchers found no new or raw unworked ivory for sale, and only one item that was reportedly after the 1947 cut-off date for antique ivory. It's widely accepted that most poached illegal ivory is transported to East and South Asia, where the primary demand exists. This raises the question of whether the destruction of countless historical artifacts is justified by the potentially minimal conservation gains the Act may achieve. As an owner, you have several options depending on whether you want to keep, sell or part with your ivory. It is perfectly legal to keep antique ivory for personal use. If you're happy to hold on to it, there's no issue. You can also gift them or leave them in a will. Lending is allowed as well, as long as there is no payment or exchange involved. If you are looking to sell or part with your item, it's best to establish that it is definitely ivory from a banned animal rather than a bone or a resin. There is an excellent guide on YouTube by Edward at Antique Arena. Visit his channel to view it. Once you confirm this, you can then check it meets the legal exemptions we discussed earlier. If so, you can register your item on the government's ivory registration website, and we will include a link in the video description for this. The fees are, as of today, £20 for a standard exemption, £250 for an exemption certificate, and this is for items of outstanding value, and then there is a reduced rate for registering a group of 3 to 20 items of £50. Keep in mind that some platforms like eBay do not allow ivory sales, even with a certificate. Selling privately or through an auction may be the best option. And for items that don't meet the exemption criteria and you do not want to keep, there are some alternatives to avoid losing them forever. Many qualifying museums accept ivory donations for public display or educational purposes. Reach out to see if they're interested. I've seen on social media the Antiques Rescue Centre. This organisation preserves antique ivory and prevents it from being destroyed. Visit their website for details. There are likely to be many people out there who want to preserve history, so maybe check out an antique forum or Facebook group to see if you can gift it. We covered a lot there about the Ivory Act and the impact it's likely to have. And as you can imagine, the debate about whether it's right or wrong will continue, and there's a lot more to it. But what is not up for debate is that this law is now in place and it's unlikely to change, certainly in the near future. So what's important is making sure you stay compliant, and with penalties as severe as up to £250,000 and even 5 years in prison, it's very important that you stay on the right side of the law. Do your own research and make sure you are confident with what you can do with your items. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know what you think. Do you have an opinion on whether about the law and whether it's right or wrong? Or will it affect you? Let me know. I always love hearing what you guys have to say. And if you enjoyed the video, if it was helpful, or if you generally like videos about the antique trade, please consider subscribing. I've got a lot more videos planned and I'd love you to be part of that journey. So thank you for watching today, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.